today. The topic is on mental health. I'd like to thank everyone, especially our civic leader team, Ashley Fowler, Fatima Kribali, and Kiala Shah for putting this together. They chose a topic that I think has generated a lot of interest, and thank all of you, our students who have signed up. This is our, as far as I know, the first event on Give Pulse to max capacity at 1,000 students. So we do look forward to having a good crowd today. I'm going to get just right into it, but first I need to say, because this has filled up on Give Pulse and there is a waiting list, we have a few extra procedures than normal. If you are on the wait list, please send an email to cce@wsu.edu and we will sort out your impact for this event. If you are a Greek student with CFSL, if you're a Greek student with CFSL, they have put in place the ideals of their organizations should be adhered to at all time in these events, and those who post comments or anything else that is not in line with those may face disciplinary action from the CFSL. So thank you very much. Without further ado, I would like to turn the time over to our Dean of Students, Dr. Jill Creighton.
Thank you so much, David, and welcome everyone to today's Public Square. It's my privilege to be able to moderate with three excellent panelists today, and we're going to be talking about mental health and COVID-19. We're also going to have space for you to ask questions towards the end. So as we're talking, if something pops into your mind and you'd like to ask our panelists, please use the Q&A function in the Zoom features below. All of you are on mute and all of you have your cameras off, so we cannot see you. I want to make sure you know that. But we will not be using the raise hand function. You do have open chat as well, and David and our good colleague Ben from the CCE are here to help us with that chat function. But again, if you do have a question that you'd like to have the panelists address, please use that Q&A function and we will try our best to make sure we get to as many questions as we can. I do want to begin today with a land acknowledgement. Washington State University has an acknowledgement of America's first peoples. There is a lot of privilege in power and place, and it's important for us to acknowledge on the land that we sit. So Washington State University acknowledges its locations statewide are on the homelands of Native peoples who have lived in this region from time immemorial. Currently, there are 42 tribes, 35 of which are federally recognized, that share traditional homelands and waterways in what is now Washington State. Some of these nations and confederacies that represent multiple tribes and bands. The university expresses its deepest respect and gratitude for and towards these original and current caretakers of the region. As an academic community, we acknowledge our responsibility to establish and maintain relationships with these tribes and Native peoples in support of tribal sovereignty and the inclusion of their voices in teaching, research, and programming. Washington State University established the Office of Tribal Relations and Native American Programs to guide us in our relationship with tribes and service to Native American students and communities. We also pledge that these relationships will consist of mutual trust, respect, and reciprocity. As a land-grant institution, we recognize that the Morrill Act of 1862 established land-grant institutions by providing each state with public and federal lands, which are traced back to the disposition of indigenous lands. In 1890, Washington State received 90,081 acres of indigenous lands designated to establish Washington State University. WSU retains the majority of these lands to this day, and we acknowledge that the disposition of indigenous lands was often taken by coercive and violent acts and the disregard of treaties. For that, we extend our deepest apologies. We owe our deepest gratitude to the Native peoples of this region and maintain our commitment towards reconciliation. If you'd like to read more about the land acknowledgement, you can find it on WSU's website along with links to pertinent data. Again, today, I'm pleased to share the space with three colleagues here at Washington State University. First, we have Sydnie Mejia, and then Dr. Jennifer Ellsworth, and Dr. Art Blume. Sydnie, we're going to start with you. Sydnie is a senior here at WSU majoring in marketing. She's excited to be finished with school, but also a little nervous to see where life takes her. Sydnie is a project leader at the Center for Civic Engagement, where she's currently interning for Citizens Climate Lobby on all of their social media accounts. Normally, she would be leading projects around communities that were specifically elementary school based, but as much as she loved it, she said it is a nice change of pace to be working on something towards her major in the pandemic. Sydnie, welcome.
Hello.
Sydnie, I'm going to ask you to start with telling us a little bit about your own journey about mental health and the pandemic.
Okay, yeah. So I'm actually going to start with my job being a project leader because that was one of the most things that got completely shaken up and it was unexpected. So right before spring break is when everyone was saying like classes were going to be online after, and we were still leading projects at the time. And so I was on a project and I was talking with one of our partners, and we were both like, oh, this will probably go on for like a couple weeks after spring break, and like then we'll be able to be back into the classrooms and working with our students again. And then obviously that didn't happen, and it was just a complete shift. And like as our team, we're always in the community, we're always on the go. And then it was, how do we move to an online space where we help our partners online, but then they're also online trying to navigate their own things, or they can't have a certain amount of people in their spaces. And so that was just a completely different shift. And I've never worked from home, and I've never been on a computer for that many hours without also being in a classroom. And so it was a completely different shift. And at that point, my parents were also like freaking out about everything. So they moved myself home and my sister home, who was a senior at UW at the time. So then it was her and I both doing school from home. And then my mom also got deployed to work from home. So there was three of us in our house all doing this at home. And I was going crazy. I was like, I cannot keep being in this house constantly with being okay. So then I started going on walks. We have like a 2 mile hill I would go on a walk on, or I would work out outside our house because my stepdad worked shift work. So he'd be sleeping during the days or he'd be at work. So one day I'm out working and I see this girl pull over and I'm like, what the heck's going on? And she comes up to me and she's like, hey, I work for the Daily News and we're looking for people who are getting out of their house during this pandemic. Do you care if I take some pictures of you and ask some questions? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like, this is so not my thing. Like, I was just like, okay, fine. But like, I wasn't like super comfortable with it. So it kind of like discouraged me to work out outside after that. But I ended up in our local newspaper. All my family is tagging me in the article on social media and sending me the actual like newspaper clipping. And I was just like mortified. So like that kind of sucked a little bit, but then I was just like, it is what it is. So I continued to like go on the walks at least, but I just didn't do workouts outside after that. But the way I mainly combated all of my like feeling down, feeling like I couldn't go see my friends, obviously, or being around my extended family was getting out of the house and either going on the walks or going to even just the grocery store. I became a big fan of the grocery store and I never thought I would. It was just simply, what can I do to get myself out of the house and get alone time? Because I was never feeling like I was actually alone. I was always in the house with someone else where I wasn't used to that. And so then coming into the new semester last fall, I was like, I love my family, but I cannot stay here. So I was already on my lease from signing back in January of last year. And so I came back and it honestly was so much better to be at home or be in Pullman and doing school online, just because that's where I was used to doing school. It was somewhere familiar where it wasn't usually I go home for a break or I go home to be with family. It was, this is where I do school, this is where I work. And then at that time too, I was able to actually go back to work a little bit into the office. And so that was an extreme help for myself too, because I was in the setting of school and I was able to actually go in physically somewhere. And so that was a huge help to me as well. And then finally I'm back home now, but I got a second job just to make sure finances were up to par, which that was also challenging too, because I'm a full-time student. I'm working for the CC in the morning, and then I'm going into the daycare in the evening. And that has been a huge stress, really, like not really stress, it added stress. And so now it's, how do I combat that? And that has just been prioritize. And my biggest friend has been my planner. And I cannot stress enough on a planner. I used to be like, oh my gosh, I can never use a planner. Like that's way too much planning for me. But then as I got older, I was like, no way, actually I need that. And so I find myself just planning things out, and that has been my other big help. So exercise, getting out of the house, and planning is my go-to these days with the pandemic.
I'm hearing the importance of environment and routine being critical for your mental health, and we'll dig into that a little bit more as we go forward. Thanks for introducing yourself, Sydnie. Next up, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Jennifer Ellsworth. Jennifer has her PhD in clinical psychology and is the Director of Counseling and Psychological Services here at Cougar Health Services. You might know it for short as CAPS. Some of Dr. Ellsworth's areas of interest include college student mental health, mindfulness-based approaches, trauma, abuse and recovery, and women's issues. In Jennifer's free time, she likes to spend time with family and friends, also going on walks with their dog and other activities such as reading. Jennifer, thanks for being here. And I think you've got such an interesting perspective on college student mental health right now, given that you and your colleagues are seeing the direct impact in the work you do daily. So tell us about your experience with mental health in the pandemic.
Thank you, Jill. It's wonderful to be here and to see such a big turnout to think about and talk about mental health. I think, like Sydnie, I'll start by sharing some observations and reflections related to work. So early in the pandemic, I think it was really clear to our staff pretty quickly, like we have to shift. We know that we're not going to be coming back to campus after spring break. We know that we have to completely re-envision what service delivery in the counseling center looks like. We have always offered all of our services in person. So individual therapy in person, group therapy in person, psychological testing in person, crisis appointments, all of it is in person. And knowing that students had been asked not to return after spring break and that we wouldn't be able to meet with them in person, we really had to very quickly figure out what's our new approach going to be so that we're able to continue offering mental health services to not only our existing clients and patients, but additional students who would typically come in mid-semester or late in the semester. So what we ended up doing was sort of pausing during spring break, not really offering continued services during that time, being available by phone for crisis sorts of appointments and reaching out to let our existing clients know we're trying to figure this out. We will have a plan for you shortly. So when I think back to last March, I'm just so impressed and so amazed by all of the collaboration that came together to adapt our services for students in the pandemic. So that's our team who had to figure out what is this going to look like and who do we need to collaborate with. Some of our biggest collaborators were with our IT staff and figuring out how do we get HIPAA compliant video conferencing available, like overnight. Hopefully none of you have experience with a software review at WSU, but it's traditionally a very time-intensive, laborious sort of process. So to get that turned around as quickly as we did felt really pretty amazing. We also did a lot of work with the Attorney General's office to figure out how do we need to update our informed consent? How do we make sure that as we move to practicing telemental health, how do we make sure that we are doing so ethically and legally and that everything is in place as it should be to safeguard student privacy and to ensure that they are getting access to services in a way that is appropriate and accessible and meaningful for them. Part of that process also included every provider in the counseling center doing additional professional development and continuing education. So everybody needed to finish, I'm trying to remember, I think we had a couple of different trainings and then a different book to read. So it was maybe like 6 to 8 hours of additional work, and people had to submit their completion of that to make sure that they were ready to offer telemental health services. The nice thing for us is that it sort of translates pretty well. A one-on-one appointment with me in my office, I mean, I like to meet one-on-one in my office, but during a pandemic, it translates pretty well to meet one-on-one with me over our HIPAA compliant Zoom. So we were able to reintroduce our services pretty quickly. I think within 2 weeks, we were back up and running with everything available via distance remotely. So that is what we are navigating, I think, in the office and at work. I think for me personally, I related to some of what Sydnie shared about the importance of environment and routine and exercise. Therapists work really hard. It's really challenging work. And I think this is a unique situation in that we're going through it along with all of you. So it's not a situation where we have the benefit of some distance and like I'm helping you with your challenging situation, but I'm at a remove. We're impacted by the pandemic as well. We're trying to figure out, I have 4 children. How are my kids going to school? Who's gonna when I'm here on campus, who's going to take care of them and make sure they log into third grade Zoom? So it's an interesting sort of equalizing experience. And I think really, for me, as the academic year, fall semester sort of progressed, I recognized like, oh, I'm on stressed out highway cruising towards like the exit for burnout. And I'm really going to need to address that. And so a friend recommended a book to me. I love to read. I'm a reader. It's called Burnout by Emily and Amelia Nagoski. It's a fantastic read for any of you who also enjoy reading on this subject. And they really, one of the takeaways for me, they really talked about the difference between coping with a stressor and managing your stress. So a stressor might be, I really want to make sure that all the services at the counseling center are up and running and smooth and available to students, and that we ideally don't have a wait list. That's not a stressor I can really resolve by the end of my workday. Like, that's not taken care of at 5 o'clock. So I have to figure out ways to manage my stress. And the recommendation from the book that I really tried to practice and apply was making sure that I was elevating my heart rate for 30 minutes a day. I know many of you are exercisers and love that and have taken to it like a fish to water. I tend to not really love to get on the treadmill and get my 30 minutes of exercise in, but I've been doing it and it makes a difference. I notice that I have more energy. I notice that I'm carrying less stress and tension in my shoulders and my neck. So I found that to be a really valuable strategy. And I've also really appreciated Cougar Health Services is an essential service. So we've been able to come into the office throughout the pandemic, which is a real privilege. I know that for many of my colleagues who have had to work from home and had challenges with that they would prefer to be on campus. So the opportunity to build that routine, to, wave goodbye to my spouse, who he's going to work from home and manage our kids' online schooling, to be able to come into the office and sort of have a more typical work day and then go home at 5 has been really, really helpful for me.
Thanks for sharing, Jennifer. And I know there's going to be a lot of questions for you as we come up into our Q&A. Our third panelist today is Dr. Art Blume. Dr. Blume is an American Indian psychologist and professor of clinical psychology and president-elect of the American Psychological Association, or APA, Division 45. Dr. Blume is an APA fellow and has been honored with the Trimble and Horvath Award for Distinguished Contributions to Native and Indigenous Psychology. He has served as president of the Society of Indian Psychologists and of APA Division 45 that addresses psychology and culture, ethnicity, and race, and is currently a member of the APA National Presidential Task Force on Health Equity. Dr. Blume has 6 books in publication and is currently writing another on Indigenous psychology and the COVID-19 pandemic. Art, we are so glad to have you here today. Your work, I think, is really so critical in the equity framework of COVID-19, really laying bare a lot of the inequities that were already existing in society and have become more stratified and more highlighted through the impact of COVID-19. So what is your journey with COVID-19 and mental health?
Well, thank you very much. And hello from the west side of the mountains. I hope it's as pretty there as it is here. Yeah, pretty immediately, COVID impacted my work and my personal life. I'll get to each of those. To begin with work, I mean, like most faculty members and students, we were transitioning during spring break to try to move things over to a brand new type of format. It was almost like we had to recreate our classes during that time. And so, it actually takes a lot of time to prepare classes, but we were trying to do that within a space of about a week or so. And we've been doing that quite a bit throughout the pandemic. Is a lot of adjustment, a lot of evolution in what we're doing in the classroom. Professors, faculty members are just as frustrated by the challenges of online teaching as students are. And I've had some of the best of times and some of the worst of times in teaching during this year that we've been sort of sequestered. And in some ways we've had some really very personable discussions in classes that were super enlightening. And in some ways, we were able to be more ourselves, I think, online, without the formality of the classroom. But then, of course, you probably all have experienced the technological challenges that I have over this time. And in terms of our scholarship and research, anything having to do with human subjects was essentially shut down unless you could do it remotely. So it has impacted many of my colleagues and myself in terms of the kind of research we can do and how we can involve students in our labs. So that's been really unfortunate. I was working on a book set, and we're still working on it. But one of my colleagues who was a co-editor of the book set, I was talking with her on a Zoom meeting in April, and she was sick. And by May, she was gone. We've all had probably known somebody we've lost. In Indigenous communities, there have been a lot of losses, and it's been triggering because a lot of the history of colonialism was around sickness and the impact of sickness on our tribal communities. So all of these things, having family members who have been ill, having concerns for colleagues who are ill, having concerns for my students who have been ill, they all certainly have weighed on us in different ways. And that's why, the one thing I would say immediately is try to be kind to each other, because this is probably the most challenging months that we have experienced in our lifetimes. And I've had many months in my lifetime, and it's certainly been one of the most challenging times that I've faced, and one of the most interesting as a psychologist. And, that's one reason why I am writing this book now is, just examining all the psychological issues that have emerged from this pandemic. It's really exposed all the weaknesses in our system in a way that perhaps wasn't apparent to a lot of people before the pandemic. So thank you.
There's so much richness to all of the stories that you've shared in your introductions. And I hope that all of you that are participating today in the audience can hear some of yourself echoed in the journeys that the folks on the panel have taken as well. Sydnie, I'd love to start with you with this next question and really kind of look at, we've known that student mental health was a challenge for colleges and universities well before the pandemic started. And a lot of the challenges have been amplified because we're working through distance-based delivery of mental health services, or just not in our regular environments, a number of those other pieces. So, and I'll come to Jennifer and Art on this as well, but I'm wondering if you could talk to us a bit about what is different about mental health and the pandemic versus what mental health looked like prior to this global trauma.
Yeah. So my biggest thing would be that getting out to go do things with like your friends or being around that type of support. And like with your friends, you could go do stuff, or you could go, like even the simple fact of going to dinner. We couldn't go out to dinner for months, or you could get takeout, but like you couldn't go to a restaurant and sit down. I didn't realize how much I enjoyed doing that with my friends and even my family until that was taken away and it wasn't an option. Just like the simple facts of just not going to do those type of things, or not being able to go on trips to do things, or being so caught up in a house, I guess, was my biggest thing, because there was always an outlet somewhere. And that separation, I guess, was a big thing too for me. Having that separation of work, school, and home was all one thing now. And so that, I think, was the biggest thing with the pandemic is I would get to leave school at school, or I'd get to leave work at work. And then it became, that's all one place. How do I leave that there? Or how do I deal with that in the same environment that I would be normally not dealing with it? So I think those are the biggest things with me, was my normal outlets that I'd go to forget about school weren't there. And then school became home, and home became school and work. So that balance, I guess, would be it for me. And that was the biggest difference. And then it was okay, so I can't talk about it with my friends in person. Like, you can call your friends all you want, but then not being able to like physically be in person with them too and talk about it in person and like bounce your ideas off of each other was another big thing that was really hard for me too. I'm very friend and family oriented. And so to have that not right out my hands was really hard for me too, if that makes sense.
So you said you could pick up the phone and call. Has this increased your actual picking up the phone and calling? Are you FaceTiming or are you still mostly texting?
I'm a big FaceTimer, so I just feel like it's fast and so then I can actually see the person, so it's a little better for me. And then we also started doing Zoom dates, so we would do it like once a week, and we'd all get on Zoom, and then we play Quiplash. It's just a game where you can get online and put in like funny answers and stuff. So we found ourselves doing that a lot, which was nice to actually have that face to face, but definitely not the same as in person. So yeah, but definitely more of a FaceTimer for me.
We've been playing a lot of Jackbox games in my household as well. So for those of you who haven't discovered yet the joys of online gaming that's interactive, it's a little bit different than if you're playing Fortnite or something. It's fun. Jennifer, how has it been different from what you're seeing from before the pandemic to now?
Some of the additional stressors for students associated with the pandemic that have come up in therapy at the counseling center. Wow, it's a list. And so there are a few different domains that I'll speak to. One, there's increased financial stressors for students. Students have lost jobs, their families have lost jobs. We know that a lot of students had difficult decisions to make about their leases. There are students who maybe would have preferred to cancel a lease and stay at home, but weren't able to. So maybe they stayed at home and are spending that additional money every month, or maybe they ended up deciding, well, I'm going to move to Pullman if I'm spending the money on the lease, but I would rather be home. My heart is at home. So that's one arena that we are seeing some stressors for students. And we know that students, for anyone, when they have unmet material needs, when you're worried about money, food, access to house care, access to health care, utilities, that creates stress that has an impact on students' mental health. So that's one of the themes of conversation that we're hearing in terms of additional stressors related to the pandemic. We're also seeing that students are reporting increased anxiety and increased depression and increased loneliness. So for anxiety, for example, students are worried about their health. They're worried about their family members and friends' health. I think social anxiety is increased. Many people are just having fewer opportunities to socialize. And so when we do have the opportunity to socialize, if a person's already maybe prone to some social anxiety or worry, it can really feel like the stakes feel very, very high if I'm having fewer social interactions. And afterward, I may be more inclined to really like reflect on and worry and kind of ruminate about, oh, why did I say that? That was such a, stupid thing to do. So we're noticing the increase in anxiety. I think the isolation and loneliness is so profound. I mean, college is a time where the idea is that you're going to connect with people, you're going to build relationships, you're going to meet new people, you're going to get to live with your friends and socialize. And we know that people are not having that experience in the way that they had hoped to. So that's having a really significant impact on students too. And then kind of thematically, the last big theme that we're seeing in terms of a difference for students is that academics are much more difficult for some of our students. Some have been able to really adapt to the remote and distance learning. For others, it's much more challenging. Some students feel pretty disconnected from professors and faculty. Some are feeling like, all of my exams are harder now. It's like my instructors think I'm going to cheat, that we're going to cheat. And so they're making tests harder or giving us less time. There's less of that sort of in-class interaction. And so for some students, they just feel like, I don't know how to reach out for help. I'm really struggling. I feel like I can't take it anymore, but I don't know how to connect with the resources that are available. So those are some of the changes that we're seeing to student mental health in the pandemic.
And Art, I'm curious to hear your answer both from your own research perspective, but also as an instructor. How are you observing the changes of student engagement and mental health in the courses that you're teaching from the before time, as I like to call it, and now?
Right. You know, especially this semester, I've seen a significant change. It's becoming apparent that not only are faculty burned out on this process, but students are burned out as well. And it's certainly understandable. So, you know, I've seen the participation, the questions in class have been diminishing over time, especially as spring has sprung. Um, you know, and, you know, we've had several sessions of just talking about the pandemic in our classes, you know, sort of a class-wide debrief that I think has been really helpful for all of us. I mean, for the students in the classroom and sometimes for me even to talk about these things. Because, you know, people are reporting that they're having trouble sleeping. They're showing symptoms of, you know, that are related to anxiety, depression. And I think depression has a big part in why people are beginning to feel somewhat hopeless in the classroom processes that we've been seeing. And, you know, there's also a sense that I get from a lot of people who've been talking about, it's like every day is like Groundhog Day, the movie, that it's just like a rewind and hold experience that we would talk about in psychology. And, you know, what it suggests, of course, is that, you know, we're in need for social stimulation, and we have to find that in a safe way. And probably the biggest hit we've taken as a society is the hit to our social safety network. And, you know, the evidence is from the preliminary research coming out of the pandemic is that, you know, anxiety, depression are way up. People are, who never had issues with anxiety and depression are having issues. People are drinking too much alcohol in society. And certainly that can impact your sleep hygiene when that's happening. And so, you know, if we can find ways to take care of ourselves and even disconnect from, you know, the pandemic in some way, I think it would be really helpful for people.
You said a couple of things, Art, that really have stuck with me throughout the pandemic, which is this idea of social safety net and what those interactions mean. Sydnie and I were talking about Jackbox games just a moment ago. I read an article a while ago that spoke to this idea that we are having perpetually realistic interactions like we're doing right now through Zoom, but that for the way our nervous systems are designed are practically socially meaningless at the end of the day. When you can't be in a room where you're able to hug your mom and dad or, you know, just sit in the same room, possibly in silence with somebody that you care about. Those opportunities aren't there. And Zoom is more or less transactional in a lot of ways. So I'm curious to hear from all of you, how have you managed to make meaning out of those social interactions when our bodies are not designed to be interacting with each other in this way?
I'll go first. So being home, what my friends and I would do is one, like I said, we do it once a week. So someone would like kind of put together like a little gift, like goodie bag, if you will. So it'd have like something to drink and then like a little snack, like something sweet or salty, whatever you preferred. And then like some chocolate with it too. So then they would go drop it off at all of our houses. And then we would wait till everybody was ready and then we'd get on and then we'd have that. So it was like, they're still like sharing something with you and like that was really nice to be able to like all be doing the same thing at the same time, even though we couldn't really be in person and it wasn't the same thing, but for them to just even be at your house, stay that 6 feet apart and just to even just say hi and be like, hey, thank you, I found that really helpful because obviously it's not the same thing. It was never going to be the same thing, but it was still a small piece of just seeing them for a second and like, hey, thank you. And I also found myself really enjoyed running into people at the grocery store, which I always avoid people at the grocery store. If I see you, I'm like, oh gosh, I'm going to be here for a while. Like I'm going to rush, or like, I don't have time for this, or, but then I like realize like how much you actually take that for granted when you don't see these people all the time and you do run into them in the grocery store and you're like, oh my gosh, how's it going? But then you're also like, we can't really stop and chat anymore either. Or you're that annoying person in someone's way or something like that. So I guess it was just really enjoying the small bits of seconds or minutes that you did get to be with those people in person is what helped me being okay with being on Zoom, if that makes sense.
I think about a month into lockdown, I ran into 3 colleagues at the grocery store on the same day. And we all had our masks on, which was new at that point. And we all just stopped and went, oh my gosh, hello, you have a whole person underneath your Zoom box. And that was really meaningful. So I appreciate you sharing that component. And that's a great idea of the treat drop. Jennifer, Art?
Yeah, I was just reflecting on kind of within my group of friends and families, I've seen different approaches to the pandemic. And I think it's really valuable and really important to get out into the world as much as you're able to, whether that's going for a walk and maybe encountering some other walkers at the park, or going to the grocery store masked up. Taking the dog out for a walk. Walking keeps coming up. It seems like that's one of the few things that we can do. But friends and family who are able to do that seem to be coping a little better than I'm thinking of a particular individual who has been much more isolated, much more at home, like truly isn't leaving the house like at all. I'm more concerned about that individual than I am about the people who, are out walking the dog and going to the grocery store and being out and present in the world. I think a couple of the strategies that I've used are similar to what Sydnie and Jill have described, finding ways to connect with people. And that's taken different forms. With my sisters, we Marco Polo now. I feel like one of my pandemic silver linings is that we do it pretty much every day. And I didn't used to have that much contact with them. With my colleagues at work, we used to enjoy the opportunity to sort of cross paths in the kitchen and our break room. And we used to use our whiteboard to write fun questions, and then everybody would take a turn with the dry erase markers to write their answers to these questions. A couple of years ago, somebody announced their pregnancy that way, like, what should I name my baby? And there were all sorts of fun suggestions. So we decided to start a Telegram sort of group chat to try to capture a little bit of that social feeling. That's where we share memes. It's where people take pictures of the sunset and text it to, share it with the rest of us. So I think those strategies have been important. And then another thing, this is one of those things that may vary depending on your preference, but I find that I get zoomed out. And I have also talked with friends and family who get zoomed out. And so sometimes just a nice phone call feels like it mixes things up a little bit, and we can just sort of focus on the voice instead of being distracted, by my own image in the Zoom box, in the Zoom chat, and like, how's my hair looking? I can just sort of drop all of that and enjoy just hearing my friend's voice.
Yeah, I agree with a lot what Jennifer's saying. Getting outside is really good. And, from an Indigenous point of view, water is sacred. And so if you can find a place with water, that can be very calming, and it's very helpful to find a place where you can take a vacation from all the stress in which you're experiencing. Exercising is really important too. I agree with that. One of the things we have done is we have set aside family hours on Zoom to connect with relatives that are around the country. And that's been, it's a set time every Monday night for one set of family members, and then on Saturday for another set. And so it's something to look forward to through the week. So I think things like that. I mean, we also engaged in reflective activities related to past trips that we had taken, over the last year, watching videos that we had made of experiences that we've had with other people. So I think a lot of reminiscing can be really important too, to help you get through these experiences. And yeah, I agree. I think playing games is really important too.
One of the themes that I keep hearing about is this need for individuals to find resilience in the pandemic, which I think can sometimes feel like self-blame, which I think is a very dangerous spot to be in. You know, we're facing a community and global collective trauma right now. Natural disaster theorists would tell you that we're in the midst of particular parts of the natural disaster recovery cycle. And you know, while we're all very excited to get our vaccines, and side note, students, if you have not yet been made eligible, you are all eligible on the 15th to get your appointments, and you can call Cougar Health Services to make an appointment if you're in Pullman. And if you're not in Pullman, your public county health department should have a whole list of where you can get that vaccine done. So I know that is the light at the end of our tunnel, but this resilience question can often feel like the onus is on me to find it. Whereas I kind of take the perspective that it's our community's responsibility to lift each other in the pandemic, because we really can't do it on our own. It's just not possible. And everyone is struggling, administrators, faculty, and students alike. So when we think about finding our own resilience, what are you seeing that's working for folks to be able to persist, to find motivation, and to keep it going in times that can sometimes feel really helpless?
I can take first crack this time. So one of the things we're doing, a lot of professional psychology organizations, especially with psychologists that are organizations that represent BIPOC psychologists, we have been planning. So, you know, like I mentioned earlier when responding to another question, there have been a lot of weaknesses exposed in our system through this pandemic process. So a lot of things need to get fixed. And so we are engaging in conversations of, you know, where do we go next? What can we do to make this not a pandemic process that has to be repeated in the future? And I think you could do that in your personal lives too, you know, to try to find, you know, potentially new activities that are novel and intellectually challenging for you, that would expand your thinking and potentially carry those new activities forward into your new post-pandemic life, whenever that begins. And, you know, related to resilience, I think, you know, resilience is with us now. I mean, we are surviving. We may be hurting, but we are in the presence of resilience. So I guess what I would say about resilience as a member of people who have had to have a lot of resilience over time is that you should be, you know, more kind to yourself and how well you're coping with this pandemic. Because like I said earlier, it's probably going to be one of the most challenging things that all of us face in our lives.
I really appreciate that comment, Art, about being kind to ourselves with how we're coping. I think that going through a collective trauma and experiencing collective grief, we're all surviving the best we can. And we know that it's really challenging. I'm so struck by the data that points out many Americans are coping through drinking, which Jill mentioned, through substance use. And also we're seeing, I think 2/3 of Americans right now have had a change to their weight that they didn't want. So people are eating more, people are eating less. These are not like coping strategies that I would recommend to you. I would not recommend drink more and eat emotionally. But if we can have some compassion for ourselves, we're surviving, we're doing the best we can. What I would encourage people to do is to think about, your foundational needs. And some of the foundational needs that I think are really important to pay attention to include sleep. I know, by the way, that all of these are easier said than done, but they're important to be thinking about. And maybe you can reflect on whether there's a particular area I'm about to mention that you could maybe pay more attention to prioritizing in your own life. So getting enough sleep is really key. Eating well is important. Movement. So that might be exercise, that might be taking a dance break in between Zoom meetings. It's not so much about going to the gym and really exercising, but just having movement, getting outside, being out of the house is really important, and connection, which we've been talking about throughout the call today. So those are the areas that I would encourage you to really prioritize. I know for me, it's sort of shifting from, okay, I'm coping through chocolate chip cookies again. And I can be like compassionate with myself about that, but also sort of remember and remind myself, but I feel really good when I get a consistent sort of like walking habit in place. Like that's something that more meaningfully helps me to navigate the difficult time that we're in. I think my last suggestion would be just, it's really important to pay attention to how you're doing and to address things early. So if I'm a month into using chocolate chip cookies to cope instead of going for walks, it is good for me to pay attention after a month and to try to shift that. I think we really commonly find that students come to the counseling center saying, I should have come in earlier in the semester. I've been really struggling for a while. So paying attention to your needs and addressing them early, it might take the form of asking for professional help, but it might take the form of realizing, like, I've not been prioritizing sleep. I haven't had a full 8 in like 2 months. I really need to prioritize that for myself right now.
I really like what they both said, and I think those are all awesome things, especially things that I've been noticing I've been doing too. And it's being online too, you don't realize how hard you are being on yourself. Like if you're not making certain deadlines, or if you feel like you're constantly emailing your professor for help or stuff like that. I also saw something in the chat about staying motivated, and something that's helped me to stay resilient and motivated is taking it day by day. I feel like often 2 times we try to plan our week completely out, or we try to plan the month completely out, and things can literally change in an instance and you don't realize that. And when you plan and then things don't go how you planned, it's often discouraging. And I find it discouraging too. If I had this whole week planned out and then on Wednesday something happened, and then I feel like my whole world is flipped upside down. And then it's like, okay, well, I have to cope with that. With if I took it to just focus on Tuesday or just on Monday and what I needed to get done by the end of that day, I feel better about myself. And it's also giving myself small rewards. So if I get my homework done by Tuesday night, well before midnight, I have this amount of time to actually like hang out with my mom and talk to my mom. And we've actually started watching What Not to Wear, really old show. You know what it is. We have Discovery Plus. So we started watching that. So like that's our time together, that we just get to sit there and laugh and enjoy all the awful outfits that used to be on it. And just like the different styles that we've gone through throughout the decades. It's really entertaining. But anyway, it's just finding the joy in the day too. Like, so like they said, don't be so hard on yourself and reward yourself for the things that you are doing good. Don't focus on the negative, but focus on the positive. That's stuff that I've really noticed that have helped me either stay motivated or feel resilient throughout even the days, the weeks, or the months. And then also reflecting on what you've already overcome, what you've already done. We're 3 semesters into being online and doing school online, and look how far we've come. Whether you just started doing online, or if you are a senior and this is completely new and you're like, this is not how I planned my senior year. It's just finding that positive in everything. And honestly, I feel like I've gotten a little closer with my professors being online, because you're not sitting in the back of the classroom like you would, or you're actually just present. I got close with I got really close with my professors last semester from being online. We had one-on-ones with our groups. And so there was only 3 members of us. So it was actually really cool to have that experience and not feel timid to talk to a professor. They're not scary, or they're not, but that'd be my piece to give is, like they said, be easier on yourself and reward yourself and appreciate what you have done for yourself and how far you have come.
So I'm going to transition into some audience questions now. We have a couple in our chat area. We only have about 8 minutes left, so I'm going to try to do this a little bit lightning round style, meaning I'm going to ask the question, I'm going to ask you to give us some quick beats on it, and then we'll move to the next question. So the first question is, with the necessary increased focus on mental health during the pandemic, students are not only struggling with the virtual experience, but also struggling financially with increasing tuition costs. Many students take a large mental impact with financial burdens. In what ways will the university address this? And as mentioned by Sydnie earlier, it was necessary for many students to be in Pullman during schooling. I'm actually going to take a quick answer at this. I want to let students know that if you had filed your FAFSA, you were eligible for 2 rounds of what we call HERE funding, which is a ridiculous acronym, but it's the COVID funding relief for higher education. And we were able to deposit directly into many student accounts more than $1,000 for the last 2 semesters. I know that doesn't make ends meet every time, but that was one thing we were able to do with assistance from the federal government. There's also a student emergency fund in my office, the Office of the Dean of Students, and we can help students with micro grants for emergency situations. And we also have excellent food pantry services that have remained open throughout the pandemic. So those are some small things that we can do to help you get through financially. I know there is job loss in the pandemic. I know that there are more macro scale challenges, but we can work with students in one-on-one settings to try to get through. Are there other responses to this question from our panel?
My one thing would be also don't forget to look, or don't be afraid to look into state assistance too, food wise, money wise. There's also like SNAP benefits. Those are also awesome resources, especially for students, that you can look into.
And it's a great point, Sydnie. The SNAP benefit eligibility threshold was lowered very recently by the federal government. So you may be eligible. Please do check online to see if you're eligible for that food benefit. The next question is, what are our thoughts and opinions about students still having to attend school during this difficult time? Last semester, I saw a documentary about how badly the pandemic is affecting college students' mental health and studies, but I find it ironic that students are still having to attend school anyways. I've also had personal experiences with professors who are super flexible because of COVID, and professors who still just give out quote unquote normal homework and normal online exams. I just think that it's sometimes frustrating to know that the world isn't normal right now, but school and work expectations for college students are still the same. No ill feelings to any particular person or place, but I think it's interesting that students are still being expected to uphold certain standards when the entire world has been turned upside down. That's a big question.
Yeah, I don't have an answer because I think the answer is that we need to re-examine what's happened and look to transforming systems and rules and institutions. I mean, some of the reasons I know that we continue to engage in education are sort of superimposed upon us by the federal government, et cetera, et cetera. So I think this is part of the process of making us more nimble for future crises, is, you know, trying to determine, you know, what is realistic. Yeah, I actually thought Jill would be a better person to respond to this than me, but I just wanted to point out that I think this is a place where people are falling through the cracks.
Jennifer, did you want to respond at all?
I think my thoughts just go to Art's description of some of the challenges, but then I'm also thinking about all of the effort that I've seen from faculty, from our K through 12 teachers. It's just been, I think on the whole, like it demonstrates remarkable commitment to education, to adapt courses, to be online. I know many faculty really didn't take a summer break. I think most faculty are on academic appointments, but they spent their summers trying to figure out how to make education and their coursework accessible, even in the pandemic, and through distance and remotely. So it's so challenging. And I am not a faculty member, but I'm just sort of reflecting on and feeling real gratitude for the bulk of professors who really, really care and have done everything they can to continue even during the pandemic.
I agree with you that I've seen a number of professors be very flexible and really try to meet students where we're at in the pandemic. And I understand the tension between trying to find normal and trying to find what's realistic. And that's a balance that we're all learning. So I think for that question asker, the one thing I would offer is just recall that your professors are struggling too, and your administrators are struggling too, and we're all doing our best that we can to give you a learning environment that resembles somewhat of normalcy, so that we can keep persisting. All right, we are very, very tight on time, so I'm going to try to get to these two very quickly. The first is, how do students combat burnout from school and turning in assignments? My answer to that is variety. I think variety is so important. And if we sit in that Groundhog Day cycle that Art was mentioning earlier, it's actually quite a bit more difficult. So there's a shadow side to routine, and that too much routine can actually build in barriers in my personal experience, but I'm very different than you, who's going to be very different than your roommate.
It reminds me of a quote from Rachel Maddow, who talked about how she combats burnout by pointing out that when one part of our brain is burned out, we can use all the other parts of our brain. So she described, like, I come home from work and I get out and I chop wood and I spend time with my family and I exercise in the outdoors, and there are just different parts that I can pay attention to while that burned out part recharges. So I love the answer of variety.
Yeah, I would just add one thing, that burnout's often associated with unrealistic expectations, and probably during the pandemic, we're just having too high expectations for ourselves.
The next question is about procrastination and how to prevent it. I've seen perfectionism described as a manifestation of high performance anxiety, and also self-disappointment in some ways. And so, especially for our psychologists, what are your tips and tricks for preventing or combating procrastination?
Well, I was one of the worst in school, so I would have been the person who would be up at midnight before a final, doing the cramming. I think, once you realize, if you do paced serial learning and you introduce that into your life, it's a lot more easy to not experience burnout, just to connect those two issues. It's like if you build a little structure into your life related to the things that you procrastinate about, and just do a little bit each day, it can be really helpful. And then eventually it'll become habit.
I agree with what Art just shared, and the piece that I would add, that I'm also a procrastinator. Art and I, kindred spirits in school. But one thing that I have found helpful is to think about helping out future Jennifer. So sometimes at the end of my workday, like there's, for example, like emails in my inbox that I haven't responded to, and I might be tempted to just like, it's like 4:50, I'm just ready to like pack it up and go home. And then I'll think, future Jennifer would really appreciate it if I responded to at least the most critical email before I leave for the day.
Sydnie, do you have any tips on the procrastination piece?
Yeah, I was just say, from a student's perspective, my biggest thing is the small goals. So what do I need to be done by tomorrow evening? Or how can I get myself, like Jennifer said, thinking of future you? So how can I not be stressed out in the future? And my biggest thing is, I do plan my whole week, but then I take it day by day. So like today, what do I need to get done in order to not be so stressed out tomorrow? I'm a big procrastinator to myself, but I've found that actually planning it out and then holding myself accountable, like I said, with a reward, has helped so much. So it's like, even I will even procrastinate with exercising. We just got a Peloton. So it's like, oh, I'll go ride the Peloton instead, which who wants to exercise instead of doing something else? Not most people, but I find myself doing that. So then it's like, okay, but then I have to do this in order to do this in the afternoon or this later on in the day. So it's kind of holding yourself to that standard with that reward piece, and then just taking it day by day.
I know we have more questions in the chat, and unfortunately, we are only 1 minute away from our ending time, so I am going to need to end it there. If your questions did not get answered and you'd still like a response, please feel free to email cce@wsu.edu, and we'll do our best to get you a response. I think with that, David, I'm supposed to turn it back to you to finalize anything related to recording impact.
Yep, thank you very much, Dr. Creighton. We do have a lot of you who have participated today, and many of you are interested in having your hours tracked. You will all receive, those of you who have registered for this event on GivePulse, an email from GivePulse. Please do check your spam or other folder, because a lot of them do wind up in there. Just click that button, submit your impact. It's very easy. Any questions that you do have, I just posted it in the chat, but do let us know at cce@wsu.edu. And thank you to Dr. Creighton for moderating, and all of our wonderful panelists, and for all of you for participating today. Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great evening.